If you're in the market for a mid-size speaker, you're probably being overwhelmed with options because there are countless small or no-name speaker brands out there. But today, we're going to be looking at two mid-size speakers from perhaps the two biggest names in this space, and that's the Sony XB32 and the JBL Charge 4. Even though they're just speakers, they do have some major differences between them to take into consideration. Now, both the JBL Charge 4 and Sony XB32 are brand new for summer 2019, and they both typically retail for $150. If you want to pick either of these speakers up, I'll have them linked down below, and if you want to learn more about either of these speakers, please watch their full reviews. Design-wise, both of these speakers are basically the same size, but obviously one of the biggest things the Sony XB32 has going for it looks-wise is its built-in light feature. It's a good-looking light feature that flashes to the beat of your music, and through Sony's app you can select from a few different lighting modes. But unlike the JBL Charge 4, which has a mostly fabric-covered body, the majority of the XB32 is covered in a soft-touch plastic, and only the front grille is covered in a fabric mesh. Now, looks are subjective, and I don't mind how either of these speakers look. But since the XB32's body is mostly soft-touch plastic, expect it to show much more wear and tear than the JBL Charge 4. But both of these speakers are fully waterproof, so you don't have to worry about either of them if you drop them in the pool or if it starts raining. Now, tech spec wise, the Sony XB32 has an advertised battery life of 24 hours, and the JBL Charge 4 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours. But realistically, with the volume on both of these speakers set at 80%, the JBL Charge 4 managed to last for 11 hours, whereas the XB32 only managed to last for 8 hours. But keep in mind, if you were to turn off extra bass mode and the light feature on the XB32, you should be able to stretch out the battery life on the XB32. But what I'm trying to get at here is that even though on paper the XB32 seems like it has a longer battery life than the Charge 4, in reality, they're evenly matched. But one of my biggest pet peeves about the Sony XB32 and Sony speakers in general that I think is super important to point out is that when Sony speakers get down to 20% battery, they'll drastically lower their volume, say please charge every few minutes, and they won't let you raise their volume past 50% until you put them back on the charger. I find this to be super annoying, and you can't turn this feature off. So when I say the Sony XB32 only managed to last for 8 hours of playback time, it wasn't until the battery reached 0%, but until the battery reached 20%, because at that point, you have no other option than to put the Sony XB32 back on the charger. But when it comes to charging these speakers, there is a huge difference. The JBL Charge 4 charges via a USB-C port, which I think is great, especially if you're an Android user. And it also comes with a decently long cable. Whereas the Sony XB32 is still using a micro USB port for charging, which kinda sucks if you're an Android user, because you can't charge your phone and speaker with the same cable. And while we're here, I thought I'll also mention that both of these speakers have a USB-A out port, so you can charge your own devices, and they both still have a 3.5mm audio jack. Both of these speakers are also still using Bluetooth 4.2, but I also found that they do have some major performance differences between them to take into consideration. I found the Sony XB32 has a wireless range that's a hard stop at 30 feet, whereas the wireless range on the Charge 4 is a little over double than the XB32's. Now, I know wireless range isn't a huge deal for some people, but I do feel it's something you might want to take into consideration when you're looking into a portable Bluetooth speaker that you might want to use at the basketball court or in your backyard. But whether you're using an Android or Apple device with the Charge 4, you're going to notice that it has a considerable amount of latency, making the Charge 4 not suitable for watching videos on your phone. Whereas if you use the Sony XB32 with an Android device, you're going to get extra benefits like NFC pairing, LDAC support, but more importantly, you're going to notice that it has zero latency across the board whenever watching videos on your phone. But if you use an Apple device with the Sony XB32, you're going to notice that it still has a slight latency. It's nowhere near as bad as the Charge 4, but it's still there. But when it comes to speaker setups, these speakers are very different. The Sony XB32 has dual 48mm frontward firing transducers and dual passive radiators that shoot out the front and out the back of the speaker, whereas the JBL Charge 4 has a single frontward firing oval transducer and its dual passive radiators shoots out its sides. Now, JBL's switch to a single transducer setup has proven to be rather controversial over the last few months, but I feel it has no problem keeping up with other speakers out there. But just so you can see for yourself, we're about to jump into a sound test. Both of these speakers are playing at the same loudness, and the Sony XB32 is playing with extra bass mode turned on.
I can't wait to leave this town, 'cause lately I've been feeling down. The cold nights just don't feel the same. Oh, like my life inside a car, hit the button, drive real far. Let that record on me die. Oh, dreaming of you, I dream of a new night. Ooh, fight in the dark till we see the sunlight. My love is you and I. Close, closer to that baseline. So reach for the stars, 'cause we're aiming high.
Sony has obviously taken steps to improve how their speakers sound with extra bass mode turned on. In the past, people have complained that mids and vocals on Sony speakers always sounded very muddy, but on the XB32, the mids and vocals are much more pronounced than before, which is a good thing. But still, the mids and vocals on the Charge 4 are a little more pronounced than on the XB32. But the thing about the XB32 is that through Sony's app, you can go in and easily change the XB32's EQ settings so you can make it sound however you want. Whereas with the Charge 4, JBL doesn't let you change its EQ settings as easily. But in general, both of these speakers are good sounding speakers because they both have a decent amount of bass, even though the XB32 does have a little more bass than the Charge 4, and distortion isn't a problem at higher volumes on either of these speakers. But when it comes to max volume, the Charge 4 does manage to get slightly louder than the XB32. But finally, one of the biggest things to take into consideration when choosing between the JBL Charge 4 and Sony XB32 is their speaker pairing protocol. Both Sony and JBL let you pair up to 100 speakers together so that they can all play music in sync. But to be frank, Sony's wireless party chain isn't the most reliable or easiest to set up. First, you gotta go to all of your Sony speakers and press the WPC button, and then you gotta go into your phone, open Sony's Music Center app, press on the party chain tab, and hope that all of your speakers connect. And even if your Sony speakers do manage to all pair, sometimes they'll get out of sync when you're playing music, which means you'll have to go and turn off all of your Sony speakers and pair them all up again. Whereas JBL's JBL Connect Plus is much easier and much more reliable than Sony's wireless party chain. All you gotta do is press the JBL Connect Plus button on all of your speakers, and the speakers will figure out the rest by themselves. You don't gotta open up any other apps, and they'll never get out of sync. So from my experience, if you plan on pairing multiple speakers together on a regular basis, I highly advise you invest into JBL's ecosystem, because Sony's wireless party chain can be a headache. So overall, if you just want one speaker, I suggest you go with one of Sony's speakers. But instead of getting the Sony XB32, I highly advise you save yourself some money and get yourself the Sony XB31. The Sony XB31 is currently going for $100, and in many ways, I feel it's superior to the newer Sony XB32. And if you want to see exactly what I'm talking about, please watch the XB32's full review. But if you plan on picking up multiple speakers in the future, then I think you're better off with the JBL Charge 4. JBL Connect Plus is, in my opinion, the best speaker pairing protocol out there. And keep in mind, the JBL Charge 4 has a much farther wireless range than the XB32 and is still slightly longer than the XB31. And finally, the JBL Charge 4 also has USB-C charging, which in 2019, I think is a must. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick up other products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.